Okay, so my name is Jessie Wadham. I recognize a lot of faces and names, and it's great to see you all. I'm the coordinator of the Trade Justice Network, who along with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, is hosting today's webinar. The Trade Justice Network, for those who don't know, is a national network of civil society, labor, environmental, student, different organizations that have come together to challenge the scope and the secrecy of the negotiation process of free trade agreements. And we are working to build a more sustainable, equitable, and socially just international trade regime. So welcome today to today's webinar, Global Vaccine Inequity, COVID-19, and Canada's Access to Medicine Regimes. So we're a year and a half into the global pandemic, and the global vaccine injustice caused by the greed of corporations and wealthy nations is impossible to ignore, or it should be. Right now, 85% of vaccines that have been administered worldwide have been in high and upper middle income countries, while only 0.3% of doses have been administered in low income countries. Just this past weekend, 25,000 doses were delivered at the Scotiabank Arena in Toronto, which made it the largest vaccination drive in North America. Many Canadians are getting their second doses, while in all of Africa, only 2% of people have seen one dose. So the response to the pandemic has just been wrought with injustice, corporate greed, and old Western imperialist patterns manifesting in the production and distribution of vaccines and other medical technologies. Canada's role in the global effort has been shameful in many regards. For one, Canada has hoarded, secured enough vaccine contracts to inoculate the population 4 or 5 times over. And while Canadian leaders continue to claim to be a leader in the global fight against the pandemic, we have not joined the 100+ countries that are calling for the waiving of intellectual property rights, which is widely seen as a necessary step to unlocking global production capacity. And so while Canada is sharing doses and giving money marginally, this does nothing to increase the production for over the 15 billion doses that we need. Canada's lack of support for the TRIPS waiver at the WTO has been seen by many as a signal that they care more about pharmaceutical company profits than helping increase the access in the time of a global crisis, which is unconscionable, really. Today, we're going to hear more about the ins and outs of Canada's access to medicine regimes and one company's experience with it and how this plays into Canada's response to the pandemic and the ongoing vaccine injustice. So Stu's going to introduce himself, give a bit of a rundown of the housekeeping, and say a bit more about today's events, and then I will introduce the speakers, and then we'll get started.
Okay, thanks very much, Jessie, and welcome everybody. It's nice to see so many familiar faces. My name is Stuart True. As Jessie said, I'm a senior researcher with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, where I direct the CCPA's Trade and Investment Research Project, or TIRP as we call it. Since 1999, TIRP has pooled the resources of Canadian civil society groups, including labor and environmental organizations, to study the implications of global trade and investment treaties for public interest regulation and policy. Richard, actually one of our speakers today, is a longstanding TIRP member, and so I'm really happy that we were able to get him for this webinar. Thank you, Richard. This is a technical briefing on the Canada's access to medicines regime. It's in light, as Jessie was saying, it's in light of the ongoing discussions at the WTO on waiving intellectual property rules for COVID-related vaccines, treatments, and medical devices. It is in some ways also a test of statements from Canada and several other wealthy countries that the existing flexibilities in the TRIPS agreement, are sufficient for the purposes of producing and exporting vaccines under compulsory license. So, that there are sufficient safeguards essentially for effective governmental responses to the pandemic. Now, those assertions are perhaps moot or tempered now that the EU has tabled a counter proposal at the TRIPS Council that acknowledges, I would say, how cumbersome the process is, but at the same time, the EU proposal is itself, as many countries have noted, is a major barrier to a better solution, which is the TRIPS waiver proposal from South Africa and India, which has vastly more support at the WTO at this stage. A letter went to the EU today from international civil society organizations demanding that the EU retract that counter proposal so that negotiations can focus on the comprehensive waiver. And we'll see how they respond to this initiative. Anyway, this is just some broader context for our discussion today, as Jessie was saying as well, on Canada's access to medicines regime, its history, its reform efforts from civil society, and its potential use in the COVID-19 recovery. So in terms of housekeeping, As I said to early joiners of the call, this is a webinar format, this is a meeting format, not a webinar. So please make sure you're muted. We don't have as much control as we would under the Zoom webinar process. Please put questions in the chat. If you can, there's a button at the bottom lower middle of your screen that says chat. If you click it, it'll open up the chat. Make sure you're saying chatting to everybody, not just me as the organizer here. And we'll get to your questions at the end. And yeah, that's it for me, Jesse. Maybe you can introduce our guests, as you said.
Absolutely, thanks, Stu. Okay, so we have three wonderful speakers today, and we're super grateful that they could join us. They're full of all knowledge and experience, and we're lucky to have them. So first up, we have Arianna Schouten, who is a researcher at the Knowledge Ecology International, an NGO that advocates for access to knowledge and affordable medicines. This year, Arianna has been working on mapping potential COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing capacity, and she has been working with BioNiagara in their efforts to make use of the Canadian Access to Medicine regime in order to export COVID-19 vaccines. We're grateful to have her participate today and share some of her knowledge. And after Arianna is up, John will go next. John Fulton is the president of BioNiagara and a project partner and spokesperson for the BioNiagara Pharma Corporation, a vaccine manufacturer in Southern Ontario. John is going to share BioNiagara's experience in the with the Canadian government this year, the Canadian Access to Medicine regime, and the global effort to vaccinate the world. And finally, we are joined by Richard Elliott. Richard is the executive director of the HIV Legal Network, a human rights research and advocacy organization that spearheaded the campaign for amendments to the Canadian patent law that ultimately resulted in what the government named the Canadian Access to Medicines regime. He and the network supported efforts to make use of the regime despite unnecessary built-in hurdles, and spearheaded the campaign to reform the CAMR to streamline it and make it more workable. Reforms that were ultimately voted down by the Harper government. Richard was a member of the expert advisory group to the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on access to medicines in 2015 and 2016. So a lot of knowledge there and a lot of history to be shared. And so thank you all for joining us. And Arianna, if you want to go ahead and start us off.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jesse, for the introduction. Yeah, as she said, I'm a researcher at Knowledge Ecology International, and KEI is an NGO based out of Washington, D.C. that focuses on better outcomes to the management of knowledge resources and has particular expertise in intellectual property, technology transfer, access to knowledge goods, amongst others. And as Jesse mentioned, KEI has been working alongside BioLice in their attempt to make use of the regime. And in light of this experience, I'll begin by walking you through some of the steps to actually get a license through this regime. So I put together this little flow chart to hopefully make it a little more accessible for those who maybe don't have a background in the regime. So Jesse, if you'd like to maybe share that. Perfect. So I'll start off by saying that the object and purpose and intention of CAMR, or what I'll refer to as the Canadian Access to Medicines regime, is to enable pharmaceutical manufacturers to apply for a license in order to export a lower priced version of the patented pharmaceutical product to a lower income country unable to manufacture it on their own. And there are a number of requirements to meet this. And the first I will discuss is the amendment to Schedule 1. So that's here on the called Order in Council amending Schedule 1 of the Patent Act. While this isn't necessarily the first step that you have to take as a prospective applicant, it's often one of the first steps taken. But amending Schedule 1 can happen at many different times in the application procedure. But effectively, Schedule 1 of the Patent Act is a list of patented pharmaceutical products that are eligible for export pursuant to the Canadian Access to Medicines regime. So effectively, if the product isn't on this list, it cannot be exported under this regime. And as seen in the flowchart, it can be amended through an order in council, which is a relatively straightforward regulatory step, but it's incumbent on the recommendation of the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry and the Minister of Health. So in order to get something added onto Schedule 1, you need to send a letter addressed to the Minister of Industry, for short, and the Minister of Health requesting the amendment of Schedule 1. And Schedule 1 has only been amended on 3 separate occasions. The first is quite well known with regards to Apotex's successful case in getting a compulsory license, which also included an amendment to Schedule 1. And the second, which I'm sure John will also talk about, was BioLice amending Schedule 1 to add Tamiflu. And the last was in 2014, where Teva requested the amendment of Schedule 1. And through all these instances, there was an initiation of interest, so a request to amend Schedule 1. And then later, after months and months, the order coming into the Canadian Gazette, so becoming official, becoming law. And from the initiation until it actually was published in the Canadian Gazette, it sometimes took between 7 and 15 months to amend Schedule 1. So this initial step that prospective applicants often have to take is a substantial time investment. And KEI, as well as BioLice, has been working the last 4 months to try and amend Schedule 1 of the Patent Act once again. But like I said, there's a considerable amount of advocacy and time that goes into this simple initial step. And next I'll discuss the submission to the Commissioner of Patents. You can see on the left sort of middle. And this submission is quite straightforward in a sense, because it's just a number of prescribed forms, but the requirements of certain forms are more substantial than actually submitting the package itself to the commissioner. So for example, you need to name the pharmaceutical product, the quantity to be manufactured, the patents that protect the product, the name of the importing country. You have to identify the purchaser. But in addition to this, you have to provide a copy of the notification that the import country provided to the World Trade Organization. So as part of the submission to the Commissioner of Patents, the importing country would have already had to notify the World Trade Organization of their intent to make use of this mechanism and special compulsory license for export. But before this entire submission to the Commissioner of Patents can happen, the generic manufacturer in Canada has to request and make efforts for a voluntary license from all the patent holders for this relevant product. So this has to be done at least 30 days prior to submitting this sort of like informational package of documents to the Commissioner of Patents. So only once they have unsuccessfully sought a voluntary license on reasonable terms and conditions from the patent holders, only then can the generic manufacturer, for example, BioLice, can then move forward with a compulsory license pursuant to the Canadian Access to Medicines regime. And now I'll sort of jump back to the other side. And as I mentioned before, there isn't a particular order that you necessarily have to do something under. So for example, you could be working on amending Schedule 1 in the meantime as you're working on this submission to the Commissioner of Patents. But for example, the voluntary license is a prerequisite to the submission to the Commissioner, and Schedule 1, the amendment and having that pharmaceutical product in question added to Schedule 1 is a prerequisite for part of the Health Canada review, but in general also for in the end, getting a compulsory license. So moving to the Health Canada review, there's effectively 2 distinct sections and submissions that the generic company in Canada would have to submit. And the first is the domestic submission, where it's the standard submission with information required to obtain authorization in the Canadian market. So for example, for a biosimilar vaccine, that would be through what Health Canada calls a new drug submission. So it follows a standard Canadian market authorization submission package. The one that's distinct for the Canadian access to medicines regime is Division 7, and that's documentation to support the differences in the labeling and marking of the product. And these submissions don't have to be done in any particular order. You could do the domestic submission, then the Division 7 submission, or vice versa. You could also do them at the same time. But once Health Canada has approved the products, the Commissioner of Patents and the manufacturer are notified. And only once the Commissioner has this approval from Health Canada can they make a determination on the application that has been submitted to the Commissioner of Patents. So once everything has come together, the Commissioner of Patents can make a decision to grant the compulsory license, and this will be granted almost as of a right because the Commissioner has little to no discretion on this aspect. And the license is limited in scope to 2 years, but can be renewed for another 2 years. And as Stuart rightly pointed out, Canada has been making specific representations, in particular in December at the World Trade Organization, with reference to Apotex's use of CAMR and a compulsory license in exporting HIV/AIDS drugs to Rwanda. And they mentioned the fact that they are the only member that has used this special compulsory licensing system, and that based on this, that the system works. However, based on KEI's experience just recently during the COVID-19, and as well working with BioLice, the fact that they're saying that the system works as intended stands in stark contrast to attempting to try and make COVID-19 products during a pandemic, and just the mere fact of trying to amend Schedule 1 taking months and months and months when there's a country and countries in desperate need of vaccines. So effectively, and I think experts and NGOs have also agreed that CAMR discourages use and is extremely time consuming and almost stands in contrast to the object and purpose, which is to enable manufacturers to get a license to export in a country in need. So I would argue it's time for another reboot to the Canadian access to medicines regime. Thanks.
Thank you, Arianna. That was a lot to take in and it's very frustrating. I'm sure you know. John, do you want to take it away?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Stuart and Jesse and your team for putting this event together on behalf of the CCPA. And a couple of corrections or clarifications. BioLice currently does not produce vaccines. It's a injectable drug manufacturer, GMP, GLP, sterile fill, fill and finish production, established in 1979. That's has a very long track record. We have BioLice as a network of countries, many low and middle income around the world that they deal with. Okay, so I guess I should. You've already introduced myself. I'm the president of BioNiagara, but I'm also the spokesperson and a project partner with BioLice Pharma. I don't know if Arianna left me much to say. I was afraid of letting her go first, but I can talk about my experience. I have a script here I could read from, but another correction. I'm not a wonderful speaker, so just a heads up. In 2006, during the bird flu pandemic, we found a way, BioLice, when I say we, I was speaking on behalf of BioLice, we found a way to reverse engineer oseltamivir, which is the brand name marketed by Roche, and I think it's Gilead that owns the molecule. We found a way to reverse engineer Tamiflu from a different botanical source. We were able to get a high enough yield from coniferous products. And at the time, there were lots of Christmas trees around. So we were getting tractor trailer loads of discarded Christmas trees shipped to the plant for our scale up. And of course, for anyone that remembers H5N1, it was a scary time. They were the only therapeutic around that looked like it had any efficacy on H5N1 bird flu was Tamiflu, and the price was scaling astronomically. I think Canada spent, I could be wrong on this, but I'm sure I saw an article somewhere that we spent around 400 million. The UK, there's still articles online, the UK spent 900 million. And we were in a similar situation where, as an injectable drug manufacturer, we were preparing to scale to produce this oral dosage. So it's a different setup. And we looked for a bit of funding from the Canadian government, but they preferred to spend $500 million on a product that they, thankfully, I think they eventually incinerated it or sent it back. So one of the issues with scaling up in 2006 was the patent. And so I started searching around online in the early days of the internet for a way to do this without the threat of litigation from these big companies. Actually, Donald Rumsfeld, who was then Secretary of Defense for the U.S. government, had reclused himself from Gilead. He was, I think he was the chairman of the board or something with Gilead. So, we'd have a big lawsuit in our hands if we scaled past laboratory to produce Tamiflu. So I stumbled on this legislation referred to as the Jean Chrétien Pledge to Africa Act. This is 2006. I think Chrétien had adopted it in 2003. He actually picked up the legislation, punted it over to Alan Rock, who was I don't know if he was Minister of Health or Minister of Industry at the time. He was back and forth. And then it went to the Director of Patent Policy. I believe it was Doug Clark at the time, and they wrote up the legislation. They wrote up Canada's version of the TRIPS agreement. And in 2006, when I discovered it, actually 2005, really end of 2005, when I stumbled on this legislation, the Harper government was just took over in Ottawa, and they immediately changed, put Chrétien's name in the background. I believe it's still the Jean Chrétien Pledge to Africa Act. I don't think that's changed. It's just been pushed into the background, and now it's Canada's Access to Medicine regime, which sounds like a program, So when you go on the website and you get a disconnected phone number, and you go to the list of drugs and it's a broken link, you think that there should be somebody there with a budget running this program, but it's really not a program. It's basically regulation changes that allow you to apply for a compulsory license. So I had all this experience, from 2006, where I was able to actually get. I'm going to jump forward too far here. Not reading from script, excuse me. So I stumbled on this legislation. I thought, here's a way to get around the patent to scale up and produce Tamiflu for Canadians and for low to middle income countries, which is, again, the market that BioLice already supplies. Many of the countries we deal with for our injectable cancer drugs are low and middle income countries. So we sell vials like this for about 1% of what this was selling for when BioLice entered the market. So we sell for vials for in under $5. So I was able to actually get a hold of some people in government, and it took 8 months, but I got Tamiflu on the list of drugs. And it took me about a few weeks to get the right people down. There wasn't a website to go to. There wasn't, the Harper government was just, I don't think they had full number extensions at the time. So I got my truck and I drove to Ottawa and I found some people that could help us with this. And 8 months later, we were on, Tamiflu was on the list of drugs, but thankfully, bird flu, which I think was killing 30% of the people that were infected. It could be incorrect in that, but it was a high kill rate. So it was scary. And thankfully, we didn't have to scale industrially. I had a colleague I was dealing with in India at Cipla. They had a warehouse full of Tamiflu and they ended up destroying it. So let me put your hand up, Jesse, if I'm running over my time here. I can come back to this in the Q&A. So in March 2021, after going through the exercise of trying to find a COVID-19 vaccine manufacturer who was either in clinicals or an approved drug, after going through the exercise of trying to get a company to take advantage of the production capacity at BioLease, and I should mention, 4 years ago, we started building a plant to produce biologics. It's one of the reasons why you see where our government's handing out right now hundreds of millions of dollars. They gave Sanofi something between $500 million and $2 billion, but you're not going to see anything until 2026. It takes years to put these together, unless you have billions of dollars, of course. But we started building a biologics plant 4 years ago. We have 3 high-speed lines, bioreactors up to 2,500 liters. Out of one 2,500 liter bioreactor, you could do probably 50 million doses a year. We have rooms full of this equipment, of 30,000 square feet. All the major infrastructures in place. There's a HEPA filter system that takes about 2,000 square feet. They're basically giant tractor trailer size filters that are supported up 30 feet up in the 50-foot high ceilings. So this doesn't happen overnight, and so we're 4 years into about a 6-year build out for a facility to produce biologics. And we realized that we could be producing vaccines. And one of the things that got us interested is Elliott reached out on behalf of the Canadian government looking for companies that could produce vaccines. And they were very excited about what BioLease had and very disappointed when the government didn't move on our offer. I think it actually, there's some kind of bottleneck at the Canadian COVID-19 vaccine task force, but we can talk about it later. So lots of conflicts of interest there. There's, it looks to me like they all got their fingers in the pie, and they're giving money to companies that they're associated with. But that's for later. So maybe I can sum this up. When I talk to journalists, this takes me like an hour and a half to tell. I did a presentation for the World Health Organization. I tried to do this in 5 minutes. I started to choke. So I'm going to start choking here soon. So it took March 2021. I think, okay, I've gone through this exercise. We haven't been able to find a partner. J&J turned us down flat. I decided to reach out to Jamie Love at KEI, and he's like, we just finished this 2.5-hour seminar on helping companies scale to produce vaccines. Are you serious? You can really do this? And say, well, we have all the equipment. Deloitte thought they struck gold when they came to us. So, and the expertise. One of our staff has spent her life in R&D and vaccine production. So I've got a great team here. So I reached out right away. Jamie puts me together with Arianna, who's I think probably the smartest person or most knowledgeable person in the area of compulsory licensing in relation to the TRIPS agreement, and now Canada's access to vaccine. Canada's access to medicines regime. So I guess I should turn some of the stuff off. So so that was 4 months ago, I guess, and Arianna mentioned trying to use. We've been trying to use, but it's really, we can't even get it started. We can't get the process started. And when I say started, we have to trigger the addition of a COVID-19 vaccine, not BioLease, not J&J, not AstraZeneca, but a COVID-19 vaccine to this special list that, correct me if I'm wrong, Arianna, Canada is the only country in the world that has this trap door or locked door in front of the compulsory license application process. So, we can't even get it started. And not only can we not get it started, but they won't the government officials won't return my phone calls. I could share a screenshot here of my local MP who promised a meeting with me 2 months ago. Senior policy advisors in Champagne's office. So, oh yeah, we'll get back to you. Nothing. Texts from top people in government. I won't name any names here, but that you're going to hear something soon. But this has been, millions of people dying, and nothing but stonewalling. So I'll leave it at that. So I'm open to any questions to discussing this further. And so much for my script. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That sounds extremely frustrating for you and the whole company. And I'm sure there will be a lot of questions about some of those details. So we're going to turn to Richard from the HIV Legal Network. Go ahead, Richard.
Great. Thank you, Jesse and Stuart and CCPA for convening this discussion and inviting me. And it's nice to see some familiar names and faces on here as well, including some comrades like John, formerly of North-South Institute, and some comrades from Gran who are very familiar with some of the history that I've been asked to present. I wish I could say that I am surprised by what John and Arianna have described, but I am not in the slightest surprised, because the approach of the Canadian government to what was then named Canada's Access to Medicines regime has been an exercise in bureaucratic stonewalling, hypocrisy, and frustration right from the very beginning. So I was asked to give you a little bit of the history and then maybe offer some comments about what it means now in the context of COVID. I think the first thing I just want to say, though, is that, Stuart mentioned the push at the WTO for a waiver of the IP provisions in the TRIPS agreement. And that is an essential part of this because that is a much broader and more upstream intervention. Something like CAMR speaks to a very specific set of intellectual property hurdles that need to be navigated and overcome in order to achieve a specific outcome, but it doesn't deal with a broader range of intellectual property issues that are at play and that can also operate as barriers. And we need to actually get more at the root of the problem at the end of the day, which is to have at a global level intellectual property rules on multiple aspects of intellectual property that are creating barriers. So that's an important part of what needs to ultimately be fixed in all of this. And that's why the proposal for a waiver there, although it would be time limited and responding to a specific context, not a more fundamental change in the structure of the regime, is still hugely important. That said, it is also important that we see progress at the domestic level, because we can clear away the threat of retaliation and pressure, at least formal pressure at the WTO through WTO mechanisms through something like a waiver, but that doesn't automatically turn on the taps and start to get more affordably priced pharmaceutical products flowing. You still need to tap the capacity to make those products and get them to the countries and the people that need them. And that is going to require action at the domestic level, both in producing and exporting countries and in importing and using countries. So that's why it is important that domestic regimes like CAMR actually be functional. And the history tells us that it's not likely to be functional without some serious change. So keep in mind that CAMR began because civil society in Canada began to push during negotiations at the WTO over what became the Doha Declaration on the TRIPS Agreement on Public Health for Canada to support the demands that were coming forward from NGOs and from developing countries for more flexibility in the WTO's rules on intellectual property, because they were emerging as a problem. And people could see that as those rules that were drafted in the global north and basically lifted largely from NAFTA As those were to globalize, they would increasingly cause barriers for countries that don't have the resources, don't have the level of industrial development in their pharmaceutical sector that a number of the countries who negotiated those rules in the global north have. And therefore, the consequence to them would be even worse than it would be in the global north, where the impact would be mitigated to some degree by those resources and by the availability domestically of that technical know-how. And I'm simplifying a little bit there because that's not going to be the same across all of the global north. That conversation was happening, as it turned out, partway through, against the fallout of the horrors of September 11th, 2001, and the concerns about bioterrorism using anthrax that followed in the months after, including in Canada, which led then Health Minister Alan Rock to say, we will override the patent on ciprofloxacin if need be, in order to deal with something like this. And we're not going to get hung up on respecting the niceties of patents in Canada on this product. And so you'd better lower your price for this, or else we're going to issue a compulsory license and start sourcing it generically. Because why? We're concerned about the health of people in Canada. If only that concern had been manifested for the health of people outside of Canada's borders by the Canadian government, because they stonewalled on actually supporting the Doha Declaration, or what became the Doha Declaration. And even after the Doha Declaration had been agreed at the WTO, that said, yes, countries have the right to override patents subject to certain parameters to deal with public health problems. And we called on Canada to act on that. They still said, well, we need to see more of an international consensus. So another 18 plus months went by, 20 months, I think, before we got to an agreement at the WTO on a mechanism that is now embedded in the TRIPS agreement that is supposedly going to facilitate compulsory licensing products under patent in one country where there's the capacity to make them in generic form, for the purpose of exporting them to countries that have insufficient or no manufacturing capacity. And therefore, even if theoretically they could issue a compulsory license within the bounds of their national legislation and within the flexibility offered by the TRIPS agreement, they don't have a domestic production capacity to mobilize under that license, and therefore need to source those products from outside their borders, so from generic manufacturers elsewhere. Once there was finally that agreement, there was an intensification of civil society's campaign that led to ultimately, about 8 months later, what was subsequently labeled Canada's Access to Medicines regime being passed in both the House of Commons and the Senate, with a number of features that the patent holding pharmaceutical company, aided and abetted by a number of MPs in Parliament at the time, some of them still there, in particular, Marc Garneau, Stéphane Dion, Marlene Jennings, and almost all Conservative MPs, with a few exceptions. Those MPs introduced a number of provisions into the final legislation that was passed that have resulted in the kinds of problems you've heard described here today. It took another year for this imperfect legislation to actually be brought into force by the government. And then it took more than 3 years to get to the first and so far only use of this legislation, precisely because a number of the hurdles had been introduced into the legislation that a wide array of civil society advocates and a number of other experts had cautioned against. And that then led to a nearly 4-year campaign to try to fix at least some of the most serious flaws in the legislation, that by the time it came to the denouement of that effort, we were, of course, under the Harper regime. And although we nearly overcame government opposition to those changes, including stalling proposed changes in the Senate for enough time to run out the clock on one parliamentary session, when push finally came to shove, we lost the effort in the House of Commons by 7 votes. I'll note that Prime Minister Trudeau, then an MP, was absent from the House that evening when it came time to vote. I think that should be noted. And we are left now with an effectively moribund regime that is exceedingly difficult to use. Let me just talk about two particular changes that advocates fought for to deal with some of the most fundamental problems, and then we can talk about where we might go from here. But as is evidenced by the current situation that John and Arianna have described, one of the problems that we argued against in the course of CAMR being drafted and debated is this Schedule I problem, this limited list of pharmaceutical products for which you are even eligible to try to get a compulsory license, assuming you can jump through some of the other hurdles down the road, which I'll talk about in a moment. There is nothing in WTO law, including in the instruments that were negotiated and agreed to try to set parameters for a mechanism like CAMR to compulsory license drugs in one country, or pharmaceutical products, I should say, in one country for purposes of export to another. There's nothing in WTO law that requires that you limit the list of products that can be the subject of such a mechanism. In fact, there was an express attempt for months at the WTO negotiations to limit any such mechanism to either specific circumstances or specific diseases or products, such as products for HIV, TB, and malaria. And at the end of the day, that effort to limit the mechanism in that way was fortunately rebuffed, and it was unsuccessful. And in fact, the clear wording of what has been agreed at the WTO is that any pharmaceutical product or product produced of the pharmaceutical sector can in fact be subject to a compulsory license for export. Canada, in its stupidity, decided nonetheless that it was going to introduce in its implementation of this international agreement a Schedule I, a limited list of products with the hurdles that you've heard described of requiring 2 ministerial recommendations and a cabinet decision in order to amend the list. That is not something that is hard to do. It's something that ought to be completely unnecessary. But if there is the political will to do it, it's something that could be done in a matter of a week. The fact that it hasn't been done yet, just in this instance, despite all of the efforts that have been described, I think is a damning indictment of the moral bankruptcy of this government when it comes to dealing with access to medicines for poor countries. A bankruptcy that was on display during the process of actually drafting and implementing and enacting CAMR in the first place. If they really actually cared about getting vaccine to people who are going to die without it, amending Schedule I is something that they could do instantly with a stroke of a pen. It should be an absolute no-brainer. The fact that they haven't done it, I think, is beyond shameful. However, if you can overcome that hurdle, which, as has been noted, has happened on a few occasions with far more effort than should ever have been required, and may yet prove successful in this instance, and I certainly hope that will be the case, we still have a number of other problems built into the regime. And this is where previous legislative efforts to fix these came into play, ultimately, as I said, defeated after several years of campaigning. And really, if I can sum it up here, what we sought was a number of amendments that would streamline this whole process so that what Arianna described at the beginning of all these different steps, many of those would be swept away because many of them are unnecessary in order to comply with WTO requirements. And instead, what you would have is a fairly simple, straightforward process that says a generic manufacturer can get a license from the Commissioner of Patents to produce a drug or a product while it is still under patent. And as long as they only export it to countries that are eligible, which are named in the legislation, reflecting what was agreed at the WTO, and they only send it to those countries in the quantities that those countries have notified they need, again, something that is required under the WTO rules, then we're good to go. Periodically disclose which countries you're sending product to, how much you're selling it for to them, and therefore apply the rules that are set out in the legislation to calculate the royalty payment that you must pay to the company that holds the patent on that product in Canada. End of story. It also does not require a would-be manufacturer under a compulsory license to actually identify a country and a quantity of the product ahead of time. And it does not limit the production of the product to that case-by-case approach. Rather, it allows for what we have called a one license solution, a much more streamlined approach that still has those requisite degrees of transparency and accountability, so that their appropriate royalty payments are made as required by TRIPS, so that there can be tracking of quantities of products being sent to which countries. But it doesn't require all of this burdensome front loading of all of these preconditions in order to actually just get rolling with making medicines at a lower price and supplying them to the countries that everyone has agreed are eligible in the quantities that those countries have determined they need. That's where we need to get with CAMR at the end of the day. Maybe someday we will. We haven't got there yet. Maybe this moment of the COVID crisis and a greater sense, at least in some quarters, maybe not on the part of the government, of urgency to deal with what is a global public health crisis, a global humanitarian crisis, a global human rights crisis, may prove sufficient to actually get us past these hurdles, but it will take a sustained push, I think. And I fear that as more and more Canadians thankfully get vaccinated, that of course the sense of urgency to deal with the health problems of those over there beyond our borders will fade, just as it has in the decades past with any number of other serious public health crises, including the HIV crisis. So let me just stop there, and maybe we can open it up for discussion. And I hope there's something in all of that that's useful for our deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for that rich history. That was super interesting. I'm going to give folks a minute to drop any questions they have in the chat, and then we can ask them. And if not, I have a few on my mind. That could get us started. Okay. Maybe I'll ask a question first and then warm people up. Oh gosh, which one to ask first? Okay, maybe I'll ask my question to John first. So last weekend, Progressive International held the Summit for Vaccine Internationalism, which for folks who don't know, was a gathering of governments from most of the global south, political leaders from over 20 countries, health workers, vaccine manufacturers, public health experts. And it was a 4-day summit, and from it, there were 5 concrete commitments made to advance vaccine internationalism and speed up production and distribution for vaccine equity. One of the commitments was for open collaboration of COVID vaccine technologies. Cuba and Mexico offered their nationally developed vaccines, which are in clinical trials, to be openly collaborated on. So to offer open rather than exclusive licensing. I was struck by how powerful this solidarity was in the face of vaccine apartheid and the corporate greed. And BioLease was at the summit, I believe, right, John? So I was wondering if you could comment on a bit what the gathering was like and on the BioLease and Bolivia agreement. John, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. I submitted a video presentation, which but I think it came in late, so I don't know if that was presented. I believe it's in the press materials. So I personally been trying to create what do I want to use here for this, my own consortium, and it was great to see the Vaccine Internationalism Summit, and we need more of that. We need more collaboration between countries and companies. And I think what's happening though is there's many companies. I'll start with this: many companies that can produce vaccines that are sitting on the sidelines, possibly fearful of the pushback or the political side winds from participating in any kind of compulsory licensing, if I may use, scheme. And so I'll go right to the TRIPS, the patent waiver, the TRIPS waiver. I can see the most important, I think, the most important part of the TRIPS waiver is that with consensus at the WTO, meaning everybody voting for it, it'll help remove those layers of fear of litigation, fear of reprisal, fear of pushback, fear of political penalty for any companies or countries that participate in loosening or attempting to loosen the IP. So I think there's lots of, from the companies I've talked to, there's many of them waiting by the sidelines, waiting to see if this is going to happen. Whereas BioLease and my company and KEI and many of the NGOs have been very vocal about this. If you look at the countries that would like to participate, the only country that I've been able to find that will participate with us in lieu of having a compulsory license is Bolivia. There are other countries that would like to participate, but again, they're waiting on the sidelines. So it was encouraging to see U.S. President Biden vote for, or it looks like the U.S. is voting for the patent waiver. We need all the countries to get together on this because the clock's ticking.
Thank you, John. There's a few questions from folks, so I'll ask the first one that I see. Does anyone have a sense, this is open to anybody, have a sense of why the Canadian government is being so firm on this issue? Not a surprise, but why so firm even when the US will soften its stance? Arianna or Richard, did you want to?
I can comment quickly on that if you like. Because right now I'm the boots on the ground dealing with this. Health Canada has responded and basically, several times, it basically said you need a patent. It needs to be a patented drug, and you have to have a country in need. That's it. That's all they require. Whereas Industry Canada, or I said Innovation, Science, and Economic Development Canada, we can't get a straight answer. So we've read all the material, and nowhere does it say that it's required to have a product ready to go, have a notice of compliance. And I didn't experience this in 2006 when we asked to have Tamiflu added to the list of drugs. We didn't provide any kind of studies, any kind of bioequivalency. We just started the process by asking to have this bird flu drug, what was thought of as a bird flu drug, added to the list to Schedule 1. Again, it took 8 months, but at least we had a dialogue, which I don't have right now. Even my local MP, Chris Biddle, won't return calls and won't talk to us. So there's some kind of bottleneck somewhere where the wheel is rusted up, or the door is welded shut. Well, that's been my experience. There's just there's no dialogue. They haven't started. They won't talk to us, which is it's kind of insane, really. You think at least just give us a straight answer so we can move on, but we can't get a straight answer, or any answer for that matter.
Right. Yeah, it's very frustrating. Richard or Arianna, did you want to comment on why Canada is being so firm on this situation, but also the waiver at the WTO?
You want to go first, Arianna? The reason I was thinking maybe Arianna wanted to go first is because she has been she's been part of some of these discussions more recently around the BioLease thing. So you might have some more recent sense of what some of the opposition is, but I think it honestly comes down to a few things, and they're probably not that surprising. It comes down to bureaucratic cowardice and a number of fronts. It comes down to being far too ideologically cozy with big pharma, which this government has demonstrated time and time again. And I think it in part comes down to a political calculus based on concentration of political power. And that is that there is a heavy concentration of the brand name patent holding pharmaceutical industry in Quebec. And Trudeau is from Quebec. They require the election of MPs in Quebec, and that gives big pharma more political leverage. I don't say that that's the only factor here, and that's why I named a few different things. I think it's several different things operating together, but together they make for a pretty toxic brew of intransigence and being willing to do big pharma's bidding at almost every turn. To answer a subsequent question that was posed in the chat about what the opportunities might be to influence Canada, I think it is twofold. One, it is, as always with this government, to appeal to their desire, however shallow it may be, to be seen to be good guys and to be seen to be doing something nice on the global stage, be acting as a good citizen of the world. There is a constant tension within this government, and it's been there for years, about a desire to be one of the good guys, but not to really have to take any particularly difficult positions to actually follow through on that. So that is, I think, the thing that gives some leverage, limited though it may be, is the sense that they are shameable. It doesn't always work, and I don't have a very deep capacity for being shamed, but there is some capacity for being shamed. And that, I think, is what needs to be exploited, particularly the fact that the US has now softened its position somewhat, although I would not trust that for more than about 10 seconds. That gives an opening to help isolate Canada further and say, look, even the US, one of the biggest defenders of big pharma for the longest time, has realized that it needs to soften its position on this, and yet Canada is going to be the holdout to do sort of big pharma's bidding. That's not a good look, and they want to look good to a point.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Arianna, do you want to add anything about why you see the government standing so firm on this and any opportunities to pressure them that you would see from your perspective?
I really do believe that they think that this one experience from Apotex was successful, and that the regime as it stands does work. I legitimately believe that that's how they see it, and that's also how they've represented it at the World Trade Organization. And I also, it's my thought that perhaps Canada has just about no point of leverage when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry at the moment, because of our absolute reliance on vaccine doses at the moment. And I could see, perhaps, as Richard alluded to, like a political calculus that perhaps this weighed into it as being a bit of a risky move for Canada.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. I think there's another question. Not sure if it would help in the bio-lease situation, but what are the prospects that waiver advocates might jointly invoke the TRIPS national security exemption?
There's all kinds of talk about the TRIPS waiver, which I think is very important. It's nothing's gonna happen without it. But I would love to have the chance to just use the legislation as it exists. Again, we got Tamiflu on the list of drugs. I think there's more urgency now for it to happen faster. If you look at what Canada did in March 2020, they modified the Patent Act. You know, it was probably a room full of paper generated to create this document, and they modified the Patent Act very quickly in a matter of weeks. Didn't take 8 months. How they did it, I wasn't watching at the House of Commons to see the various Gazette publications and the public. They probably got rid of the public commentary period. It happened very quickly. So I would like to have the opportunity to try it out. Let's try this process out. But they're not communicating with us. The government's not communicating with us, and that's Industry Canada, for that matter. We have a great dialogue, we have great collaboration with Health Canada, but I believe this is Industry Canada bottleneck. I said bottleneck. And so Richard talked about, I guess, shaming them into starting the process. And, you know, this project's been written up all over the world. It's been in the Globe and Mail twice, on the front page of their online version, front page of the print version, New York Times, Washington Post. A couple of days ago was in Der Spiegel in Germany. It's all over. It's everywhere. And
I did say their capacity for being shamed was quite limited.
Yeah, well, I think it was a little bit of that in 2006. I got Harper's government caught them on their back foot. It got them to say. And it was a front page story in the Ottawa Citizen, I believe, or front page business, where they said, we don't see any reason why this drug will not be added to the list of drugs on Schedule 1 of the Patent Act. And it was a front page story, front section story. And I think it was hard for them to backtrack on that. I think to say just, drag their feet for 8 months. And I think the historians will look back at the documentation on this project and just shake their heads and wonder how the Canadian government could allow this to happen. And I'll quote Arianna from one of our very first meetings, with government, is if we can't get this legislation to work now during a pandemic, what's the use? Like, really, what's the use? This is what it's for. You pull the smoke alarm, and the fire department's supposed to show up. And you go downstairs and you look, and the water's not even hooked up. So
I think it's hard to avoid the obvious conclusion that this is about race and class. That's what's going on here. Within 14 days of the WHO declaring COVID a pandemic, Canada had passed, for a temporary period, the legislation you referred to that allowed it to basically commissioner patents upon government request to override any patent in Canada and issue a compulsory license for domestic production for domestic use. Here you spent months just to get them to add a product to Schedule 1 to create the possibility that you might then be able to jump through a number of hurdles to supply a product that people are dying from, that we are no longer dying from in Canada because of access to vaccine. I mean, it's just global racism and classism par excellence, if that's the phrase that can be used. That's what's going on here. And that's where I think there is potentially, again, a limited capacity to shame the Trudeau government into actually doing the barest minimum, which of course should not be required, but appears to be.
Well, one of the and another issue that BioLease has is the government came to us and identified us as a potential candidate for funding from the Strategic Innovation Fund, and so we were moving toward producing monoclonal antibodies in our biologics facility. And at the time, to be truthful, we were starting to think about vaccines because we had all the equipment to produce vector vaccines, vector vaccines, coronavirus vector vaccines. And so we figured, okay, well, we'll just speed up the buildup, get it to tap into this innovation fund. We already had all the equipment, the facilities there. We needed some money to speed up the scale up, and I think it would have been maybe $4 million total to basically to hire more contractors, hire trained staff, and because this is a 6-year plan. We're 4 years into a 6-year plan, so that's a year and a half ago. We've watched the government hand out billions of dollars to companies that, if you do a quick Google search, you can see many of these companies are connected in some way to officials on the vaccine task force. So, I guess they had to find industry experts, but all we asked for, BioNiagara asked for to make this project relevant to the emergency at hand was less than what they would have spent on a small PPE order during the early months of 2020. The government, I think the government handed out one contract to a company with no website, no PPE experience. What I could see was $325 million to a company for a PPE order, which we needed. Granted, we needed these products, but these are all non-RFP handouts to companies with no track record, with no questions asked. And we are watching this money being handed out for PPE and money being handed out for projects that vaccine production projects that were many years in the future, unrelated to COVID for that matter. And we're like just shocked, really, that we're sitting it on our hands. Like right now, to buy a high-speed fill line, this is a machine that grabs like 60 vials every second. Produces hundreds of millions of doses, tens of millions of doses, bottles. That you're looking at 3 years for those machines to be built and delivered. We have 3 of them sitting here at the plant, sitting idle. We have bioreactors again, which you can't get your hands on these machines. These are actually stainless steel bioreactors that don't require the plastic bags that are in short supply right now. And BioNiagara is a company that's directly involved in the supply chain. We can get the stoppers, we can get the vials, we can get everything we need to produce vaccines. And we're one of the few companies in Canada that exist now that have production, fill, finish capacity, and the laboratories and the people that could do this. So I'm just wondering, there should be a conference just on conflicts of interest to see, if all the money, where is this money going? Why is it not going to? Why is not a small investment coming to BioNiagara to help us scale up, and so throw some money at some staff to get the Patent Act amended and add COVID-19 vaccines to that list. The beauty, the silver lining of this list, this trapdoor I call it, is once you're on the list, Arianna, maybe you can back me up here. They can't stop the process. They have to, unless they quit the WTO. Once we're on the list, ultimately we will get a compulsory license. In this case, for the J&J vaccine, which I think for us, for supplying the low and middle income countries, the one shot dose is the way to go.
Let me just interrupt quickly. It's not that once you get onto Schedule 1 that it's an automatic approval by the Commissioner of Patents, but it's one of the requirements, and it's one where you need the political will more than other parts. And once everything else comes together, and with the application of the commissioner, you have the WTO, you have the voluntary license request, the WTO notification, the approval by Health Canada, which is a prerequisite, you need Schedule 1. Once you have all that, then it goes to the Commissioner of Patents to finally make a decision.
if I went to Health Canada right now and said, here's our clinical trials, here's our, we need a notice of compliance, here's our SOPs, here's our blueprints, here's everything. Actually, the BioLease facility already has the highest license you can get for an establishment to produce injectables. It's, you know, if we stood in front of Health Canada, they would just say, well, are you on the list? No. Okay, well, once you're on the list, come and talk to us. So we go back to Industry Canada and say, well, Health Canada won't give us a notice of compliance until we're on the list. Well, Industry Canada is going to say you have to have a notice of compliance before we allow you on the list. So it's a catch-22. It's just basically we're chasing our tail, and it's not written down anywhere that we require a notice of compliance to start this process, as I mentioned earlier. So for sure, I'm just speaking, Arianna, of you know, to trigger the process. Well, and again, you mentioned earlier how we've gone down several roads. We're in communication with J&J. We've sent out several letters. We have a customer. We have Bolivia who's agreed to take the first 15 million doses. You know, we have the facility. To make this happen, we need to continue to pressure, to shame, to embarrass, whatever the term is, the Trudeau government into triggering this process. And that's, you know, all my focus really is get COVID-19 vaccines, and why not therapeutics. Doctors, MSF is actually asking for therapeutics as well to be added to the list of drugs. That's where our focus is, because it doesn't go anywhere. How could, you know, should we take the risk, all the risk, and then build up, spend the money, go through clinical trials, get everything in order, and then they still don't add COVID-19 vaccines to the list of drugs? So what's the use?
Thanks, John. I see people dropping off the participants list at this point. We're getting close to the end. I see, Richard, your hand's up too, so definitely get a chance to speak. I had one question or kind of point I wanted to make with respect to the shaming campaign as well, which is just looking at the government's own material on the access to medicines regime. They pitch it, right? They pitch it to companies as a way to, as a kind of public relations boost in the developing world, right? And as a way to foster new clients in the developing world. So I wonder, I mean, this was granted, it looks like the last time the site was updated was 2009. So maybe it has something to do with Harper messaging versus, you know, Chrétien or Trudeau messaging. But anyway, I wonder if that's something too to keep in mind, that this is also a business opportunity, and that might ring true. Beyond the shaming, there's also that kind of perk. I also have a question with respect, I know we're right at the end, but I do wonder about, and Richard, you alluded to it, this electoral calculation, right? Are we going to see post-election, depending on what the government looks like, a flip? You know, all of a sudden they flip the switch, and we're the benevolent, you know, suppliers of these once everyone in Canada is vaccinated, right? I mean, there was a release recently of these, a censored release or release of censored agreements with these brand name companies for purchasing, right? And I wonder to what extent there is this kind of understanding that may disappear at some point once we're all vaccinated with respect to Canada's position on this. But that could just be conspiracy. I mean, I admit that sounds rather conspiratorial, but I'll leave it there. Those are just 2 points I wanted to make. And maybe if everyone wants to say one final thing before we wrap it up.
So can I just ask a question, but first a comment on what you just said, Stuart. I think what you will see is donations of unused vaccine that Canada has purchased, because that doesn't threaten anything structurally at all. It's just, oh, look how benevolent we are. It's a standard classic charity approach, and it has put all the money in the pockets of pharma. And then Canada can say, here's some free vaccine, but look how good we are as a global citizen. I think that's what you will see. I don't think you're going to see any flip of a switch on the policy front. But I have a question for maybe Arianna or perhaps John about what have you gleaned about what went into Bolivia's decision to make the notification, and what sort of reaction there has been by pharma or by other member states to Bolivia being prepared to purchase if a compulsory license can be granted under CAMR.
John, do you want to take that first?
Sure. Well, when I reached out to Jamie in March 2021, I believe Bolivia had already notified, correct me if I'm wrong on that, Arianna, the WTO, that they had an interest in participating with a country that was willing to export a patented drug.
They notified on May 10th.
Okay, May 10th. Okay, so I think that was
They made a general notification in February, and then they made the specific notification in May.
right. Okay, right. So in that, I discovered that Bolivia had made this notification once I had interest from KEI to help us with this, because really it's like a full-time job for a team of people to just get the process started. And what company is going to spend that kind of time and that effort? I don't know. So Bolivia had already shown some interest. So when we reached out to Bolivia, I believe they're very excited at this opportunity. So if for us to apply for a compulsory license, we need to get the process started. We need a country. So we had our country, we have the facility, we have the expertise, we have everything we need to, I believe, to make this happen. So I think Bolivia, they're very courageous. They've stuck their neck out to do this, and we need to make it happen. We need to pull this together, get the Trudeau government to pull the trigger and start this process. Does that answer the question?
I'm just wondering what reaction has been to Bolivia doing this, whether you've gotten wind of any of that.
Oh, from our government?
Yeah, or
yeah, I don't think there's any kind of conversation between Canada and the Bolivian government. I think the Bolivian government has reached out. I know at the WTO event, the South African government asked the Canadian delegation what was happening with the BioNiagara case, and no, I think that's happened a couple of times, but a few countries that have asked the Canadian government, there's been no response. That whenever a journalist approaches the government, they just get the same copy and paste boilerplate response, which it goes something like this. They'll say, okay, how does BioNiagara get drug added to Schedule 1? And they'll say, oh, this is ISAT, right? They'll say, oh, it's not about Schedule 1. it's about they changed, it's a bait and switch, or well, it's a bait and switch. They'll answer, they don't answer the right question. It's like saying, is that an orange? No, I'm going to get a haircut. So I can share the press release or the document that ISAT shares with all the journalists. Many of them have shared the same response to me for commentary, right? And it's just not answering the question. Whereas Health Canada, they answer the question. They has to be a country in need and has to be a patented drug. That's all they say. And it should start, the process should start. So yeah, as far as Canada responding to Bolivia, I don't think there's been a response. I don't think it's the same thing. It's stonewalling. They're stonewalling everybody. If they start to talk about the process, they may as well give us a compulsory license as far as optics are concerned. As far as in the eyes of big pharma, they may as well just give us the license, because so they won't talk to us for that reason. And whether it's because we have an election coming up and they want the vaccines to keep flowing into Canada, and every vaccine is the equivalent of, say, 3 votes, I don't know for sure, but there's definitely, I think that the invisible force here is big pharma.
Great. Okay, thank you. Arianna, did you want to say anything as last remarks?
No, I think in general, Bolivia has been disappointed with Canada's response, but I'm not sure how much I can say publicly.
Right. That's fair. Okay, well, I just want to say a final thank you to all the speakers. That was really informative, very interesting, and a lot to think about and to plan around. And thank you all the participants who came. It was great to see everyone. And we will make the recording available soon, like shortly. Yes, Stu, did you have anything?
No, that's it. Also, thank you to everyone for joining. I thought it was great. I look forward to listening to this again, actually. There was a lot there. So thank you for joining, and thanks to the speakers as well, in particular, for making time today to join us. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Stuart, Jesse.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think for organizing this.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you.